All right, good evening, everyone. Welcome to our third session of the Charlottetown Food Council's Conversations About Food series. So we're really excited to have you all here this evening and are really looking forward to the discussions that we'll be having. We already had our first two sessions last week with some wonderful panelists that raised powerful concepts, issues that we can all work to address, and insightful solutions and ways forward. We have one more session in the series after this evening, so please make sure you join us then as well. We'll provide more information for that at the end of the session. I'm just pulling up the screen here. So while we were hoping to be able to convene back in person in March and April, we hope that we've come up with a valuable way of engaging in conversations about our food system in the time of COVID-19. We recognize that not everyone has access to the internet and so may not be able to participate in these sessions. I would like to therefore acknowledge that this is not a solution and no means a final step. We hope that this is only the beginning of these kinds of conversations, and we hope that this generates ongoing dialogue and actual action down the road. I am Megan Adams, a member of the Charlottetown Food Council, as well as a health promoter in the province's Department of Health and Wellness Chief Public Health Office, and I have the wonderful pleasure of moderating today's session. And we also have tech support from John Kimmel, who you just met at the beginning, Jackie Skaman, our project manager, and Food Council members who will be supporting some of the breakout discussions. So here's an overview of what you can expect for the session today. We will start with an interview with our guest panelists, then break out into smaller group discussions, and then finally come back for a question and answer period. Please, again, use the chat box throughout to ask your questions. We hope to get everything covered within the hour that we have allotted, and I will do my very best to keep things moving and respect your time. I would also like to acknowledge that this is a safe and inclusive space for open dialogue about our local food system and for knowledge sharing. Please be respectful of other participants and feel free to engage in the conversation in whatever way you feel most comfortable. You can reach out in the chat box to us if you have questions throughout. Before we begin today's session, I would like to acknowledge that the land that we are calling in from and discussing as it relates to food is in Abagwid-Mi'kmaq, the traditional and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. When talking about food, we must ensure that we acknowledge the land which we produce on and its history, and that we honor our peace and friendship treaties. So the goals for these conversations are really to bring community together with their neighbors, community champions, leaders, and experts to start to have conversations about food in our local system, to validate our food asset map that the Charlottetown Food Council has recently developed, and to guide the future work of the Charlottetown Food Council. So speaking of, who is the Food Council? This was a body established in 2018 by the City of Charlottetown, and it's a working group that works in an inclusive, collaborative manner to tackle issues within the local food system through advocacy, initiatives, and policies. The Council's vision is for a vibrant community built on a healthy food system. The council members bring together individuals with different backgrounds, perspectives, and expertise. Current members are Karen Murchison, Morgan Palmer, Phil Ferraro, Brad Doiron, Sheena Matthew, Colleen Walton, and Chairperson Bernie Plord. Our city support is the wonderful Katrina Crystal, Sustainability Officer for Charlottetown. This is a wonderful group of people that I have the honor of working with. They all wear many hats in our community and are all very passionate about improving our local food system. One of the first action items of the council was to develop a food charter, and this is a vision statement that describes what our local food system should look like. This was an important first step to ensure that action and advocacy policies and projects remain embedded in the council's values and goals. These are the principles for the guiding document. And I'm just going to skip through the next part just in the interest of time. There are some other important guiding documents to the Food Council's work, and just noting for you that all of these can be found on the city's website on the Food Council's page. I'll provide information about that later. So let's talk about asset mapping and why this might be valuable. Food assets are places where people can grow, prepare, share, buy, or receive, or learn about food. They are the resources and strengths that already exist in a community, and community mapping is just one way to create a snapshot of that food system. The reason we would want a local food asset map is to identify the existing strengths that we have, to then engage residents, organizations, and decision makers in conversations about our local food system, such as this one. A local food asset map will also help the Food Council and other food-related organizations to gain a better understanding of where opportunities may be to improve our local food system sustainability and inclusivity through partnerships, policies, and projects. So, tonight we're talking about growing, building, and supporting. And the hope of this series is to touch on a number of different themes of our food charter and food asset map. This evening's theme is really to highlight the power that can come from neighborhood level action, to build on individual food assets within our communities, and to support each other in building community and a sustainable local food system. This theme is really inspired by the way we saw community come together and support each other during COVID-19, but also by the many examples of projects across the country and the globe that really demonstrate how action at the neighborhood level can be a means of establishing food security and contributing to food assets in a community's food system. National, provincial, and municipal policies are so important to moving forward and improving our food system, but we also know that neighborhood levels can just be just as powerful and sometimes create the ground swelling needed to make change at a larger scale. We want to talk tonight about ways that neighbors can support each other to build on existing local assets and how to build on these strengths to achieve action through contributing to our local food system. This is again an important theme, but by no means a solution to improving our local food system. So the hope is that this is the first of many conversations that translate into real, inclusive, and sustainable action. So we are delighted to have some incredible panelists with us this evening. We have a strong community champion within our local community with us, as well as a resource from another jurisdiction with us this evening, and they both have a wealth of knowledge to bring to the table for this theme. Lisa Fernandes currently serves as the Communication Director for the Food Solutions New England Network, based at the UNH Sustainability Institute in Durham, New Hampshire, helping to build a just, healthy, and sustainable regional food system. She founded the Resilience Hub in 2005, based in Portland, Maine, and directed the organization until 2018, growing it to nearly 3,000 members and delivering more than 800 community building and educational events. She is an experienced strategist, facilitator, speaker, network weaver, and educator who believes that resilience building, community connectivity, and participatory design are among the best approaches we have for creating vibrant futures and for navigating the challenges we face. I think we're in good hands this evening. I also know that she has some close ties to PEI, and some of you may already know Lisa. We are delighted to have you this evening, Lisa. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Ann Wheatley has been working as a community organizer for more than 25 years, whether it's a volunteer or in her position as program coordinator with Cooper Institute, and spends much of her time encouraging people to take part in conversations and take action on a wide range of issues related to livable income, food sovereignty, and environmental justice. She is dedicated to the idea that good public policies and decisions can be made only when the people who are most affected are included in a meaningful way from the beginning in their development. I couldn't agree more. Anne is a founding member of the PEI Food Security Network and served for many years on its board of directors. And thank you so much for joining us this evening, Anne. We're really glad to have you with us. So I'm so excited to have the opportunity to speak and listen to you both this evening. I think you both bring different backgrounds and perspectives and obviously different jurisdictions and are really going to complement each other well. So I think we'll get things started off with a fairly broad question for you both. And that would be, what does food security mean to you? And what does it mean at the local neighborhood level? So maybe we'll start with Lisa and then we can move on to Anne.
Yeah, thanks, Megan. It's a great opening question. And of course, there's no one right answer, but I can certainly speak from some of my experiences. I feel like food security is something that happens at a lot of different scales. And in some ways, it's kind of nested versions of food security. And by that, I mean, what we are able to do at our household level, those of us who, some of us maybe have skills around food preservation, being able to make the most of the food resources we have access to, maybe even growing food at home. But in addition to the household level, it's sort of like what's going on in our neighborhood. And I know we're going to get to that a little bit more later this evening. And that's nested within the municipality and the broader region and the district, and then further on to the province and at the federal level and beyond now in a globalized food system. So I feel like it's something that has to do with both access to the resources it takes to feed ourselves healthy food, a belief in the fact that we are in this together and that it requires people in the community to work together to produce a food system that serves us all, and that people see themselves as part of it, that they have their own sort of agency in creating their food future in some way. Not that there's a prescription and that everyone must participate in a particular way, but I think that just thinking in terms of those nested levels of food security and thinking about where each of us can play a role and then be in mutual aid and support with each other is kind of the key big pattern that I've seen. And of course, there's lots of little pieces in and among that, but that's sort of my broad first take. So I would pass the baton over to Ann.
Yeah, I think, and just before we get to Ann, I think you really highlight, it's a perfect way to start. You really highlight why we're talking about local food assets. There are different levels, and if you eat in Charlottetown, wherever you are, if you grow food, it doesn't matter if you're a producer or an eater, you are part of that food system, and you bring skills in a way. So the different levels, I think, is a really great way to start. So Ann, do you want to build on that and what food security may mean to you, and what does it mean at that local neighborhood level?
Sure. So I really love what Lisa had to say, and especially about people seeing themselves part of a food system is really, really important to me. I think that, too often we think of food security as simply having access to enough good food to be healthy and well and active. But I think it's way more than that. I think that you can't really have food security unless you have a healthy food system. And I think that you certainly can't have food security unless you have a livable income for everybody. But the food system aspect, I think we can never talk about it unless we acknowledge the system that we have right now that has a lot of challenges. It's really based on capitalism. It's based on colonialism. It's based on a patriarchal system and racism and exploitation of the environment as well as of workers. So I think, to me, working for food security means addressing all of those issues. And that's a pretty tall order when you look at it. But I think, coming back to what Lisa said, it's about finding your way in and about finding a place where you feel like you can make a difference or participate in the system. So I'll stop there. Oh, and sorry, I wanted to say about neighborhoods too, that it's really about social inclusion and equality, and neighborhoods seem like a very good place to start that kind of work when you're talking about, taking people working together to ensure that people in their neighborhood are food secure, and while being aware that you're part of the larger system.
I think that's such a great way to kick this session off. And I think that last point, Anne, is really a really important one, and why we decided to talk about the neighborhood level this evening. There are so many themes within our food system that we could choose from, and we really tried to embed the topics over this series within the food asset map. But this one in particular, it can be embedded in all of the topics we're talking about. And I bring up food security to start off today, acknowledging that we aren't having a specific session on this, but this is a really, in talking about the different levels, there's different groups that are affected in different ways and different levels that are affected in different ways. And so just sort of setting the tone there, and how neighborhoods we can support our neighbors, but acknowledging that each individual, they're an asset to their own neighborhood. So thank you both so much for that. So moving on and talking about local food assets, something that we know that's really important to look at is the neighborhood and the smaller community levels. You've already touched on that here. And I just would like to hear both of your thoughts on why this might be important. And so how can a smaller neighborhood level of support and assets have an impact? And why might we not just focus on provincial or municipal policies? So maybe we'll start again with Lisa, and then Anne, you can take.
Yeah, thanks for that. And I'm really appreciating Anne's remarks there. And it makes me really think about the fact that I think, particularly with the pandemic, a lot more people have come to see the brittleness, the aspects of our sort of nationalized or globalized food systems that don't always serve us. And many of us maybe have been working on those topics for a long time, but now they're more visible to more people. And it's a really interesting time where I think there's a lot more sort of fertile ground for these kinds of conversations to say, you know, how do we do some redesign? How do we change this in order to make it more resilient, to support more people, even in times of disruption, obviously. And I'm sure that's come up in your other conversations. Neighborhood level, for me, I'll just mention one thing and give a couple of examples, feels like a very important leverage point in this sort of multifaceted system. And all of those things are needed, you know, provincial, federal, all of those pieces. But, you know, I don't think we have to engage in, you know, tactical sectarianism to say one way is better than another. We need like all approaches, I think, and all our creativity to bear on this. But I do think, you know, I'm reminded of moments when maybe there's a big storm and the power goes out, like one of my last moments at the Acorn Conference in PEI when the bridge was closed and I couldn't get home. And that was an amazing storm. And, you know, who here hasn't had the experience of maybe a big storm, and who do you connect with in those moments? It's often the people that live closest to you, to your neighbors, who's on your street, who's on your block. You know, you help shovel out the person who may be an elder neighbor or something like that. And have you ever had that moment where the lights come back on, but you were just getting ready to play a fabulous card game by candlelight and you're like, darn, the lights came on. There's something going on for us as humans, I think, that resonates at the neighborhood level. And in some ways, and I can speak to it for Maine, but maybe there's some aspects of this true for where you are as well, that you know, the neighborhood is where you turn sometimes first in times of trouble. And we have not really, I think, reckoned with the fact that we're in a historical moment, perhaps the first historical moment over the last, you know, amount of, you know, human history, you know, as colonizer settlers in this part of the world, where we technically have designed a culture where we don't need our neighbors if we don't want to need our neighbors. Like we don't even have to know them if we don't want to. We get our food from the grocery store, you know, we get our entertainment from there, we get all of our things, we can drive to those places or walk to those places. So I feel like there's a re-enlivening of neighborhood level culture that really can be activated by food. And so some examples from here that I've been part of have to do with edible landscaping in neighborhoods. Obviously, community gardens are a big part of this, skill sharing, so many great skills that our amazing elders and seniors still carry that, you know, it's just exciting to be able to honor that and share that. We've also done some great stuff down here around work parties, like almost barn raising style work parties, where we move from place to place every month, and between 30 and 50 volunteers show up to transform a place in a day. It can be residential or a community space. Everything from installing food gardens to chicken coops to rainwater collection to firewood storage to building a root cellar, like all of the things that contribute to security. And we built those programs here based on this reciprocity model that if you volunteer on 2 or 3 of these work parties, then you can put your name in the hat to receive a party the following year. And really just building that and sharing skills and learning how to do these things in a really non-judgmental way and a very community oriented way. So I think there's lots of great examples that can happen at the neighborhood level. And it's perhaps one of the most radical things we can do in this time is like really get to know our neighbors more deeply. And I'm sure for some of you that's already happening, but it feels like a muscle we need to flex a little bit more in order to strengthen it, for sure.
Thanks, Lisa. I think you're so right. There's a real power behind that connection. And I'm so glad you brought up the storm example, even when you were in PEI. I know that I had some really great conversations with folks from last fall for Dorian, and the power behind the connection and that neighbor to neighbor support. And you're right, we rely on it in those times of crisis, but not necessarily daily. We're sort of driving in garage doors and may not know our neighbor's name. So I hope that this is the start of that re-enlivening. Anne, would you like to build on that? You know, why maybe not focusing on some municipal and provincial policies, and how can that neighborhood level have an impact?
Well, I think that, I mean, everything that Lisa said, and I think, you know, definitely storms and the pandemic have shown us the capacity of smaller communities or neighborhoods to support their people who are most affected by whatever crisis it is. And I think, so there's a lot of power in that, I agree. It's just easier for people to connect. It's easier, I think, for people to share their skills when, you know, they're just not so far apart. And it can be less daunting to just become involved at when you're at the neighborhood level. That all being said, and I do think that they're not really separate all the time. So you can really, I think, you can create more food security at the neighborhood level by gathering together people to advocate for zoning bylaws that allow, you know, you to raise poultry or bees or whatever. You can advocate for more green, the planning, you know, city planning to include more green space for community gardens. You can advocate for better public transit so that people have better access to food resources that are in and outside of the neighborhood. So I think there are a lot of things that people can, that, you know, working as a neighborhood is not unconnected from working at the municipal or the provincial level. So because a lot of those sort of larger system things are really dependent on good public policy at those other levels as well. So I would say that, yeah, I love the idea of neighbors supporting one another and working together, especially around issues related to food. But I think that sometimes what they're working on is advocating at a different level.
Yeah, that's great. And a really important point to acknowledge. It's not about forgetting some of those levels. It's working together as a unit. And why we're here tonight is to really highlight why this particular smaller level that people not necessarily forget about, but we don't really talk about in the realm of policy or that action in the same way, just to make sure that that's a part of the ground swelling, and then it becomes that action. So thank you both for that. This next question, I'm particularly interested in hearing from you on this one, Lisa, and just in the interest of time, and maybe you can build on right away any thoughts that you may have, and then we'll move on to the next one after that. So what are some examples of successful neighborhood level projects in other jurisdictions that have contributed to food security, increased sense of community belonging, all of those things that come with that neighborhood connection?
Yeah, I'll just quickly mention a few more things to build on the list from before, but and also David's remarks in the chat. You know, neighborhood food hubs, sometimes those can take a variety of forms. I've seen them based in churches or other faith-based sort of institutions, community centers, leisure centers, you know, whatever sort of format. The key is that the neighborhood themselves are the drivers, that, you know, they have a direct role in deciding and creating. It's not something that's imposed from without. And so maybe that speaks to another form of food sovereignty for those that are, you know, have a say in their own food future. I also want to point to an example from around here that isn't happening right now, but while it was going, it was amazing. And I feel like it holds a lot of promise. And it's something that we had here called the Winter Cache Project, CACHE. And about 20 minutes outside of the city, a farmer who wasn't using all of their land made a couple of acres available for, you know, free. There was an agreement to this community group from Portland. And twice a week, the community group, the Winter Cache group, would organize field trips, carpools, whatever, to get anyone who wanted to get involved and learn how to grow food out to that acreage. They worked together to plan, choose crops, grow food together. They just tracked their volunteer hours. And then in the city, there was one old house that had an intact old root cellar. And throughout the entire winter, they would do weekly distributions of food back to all of the volunteers, commensurate to the time they spent volunteering and learning throughout the season. So there was no cash barrier. People could volunteer in other ways if they had some physical challenges and couldn't go out to the farm. But it was sort of just another community way to link city and country and share that experience. So I think there's a bunch of variations on that theme, but it is one that's really worked well here, in addition to like food forestry or public orchards, and you sort of reimagining the commons, if you will.
Yeah, and I know that often when we're talking about health promotion and our food system, transportation is quite often a barrier here in Charlottetown and PEI. And so recognizing that and what that looks like. So that's a really good example in talking about that. I think there may be some programs for some communities that do that here, but there's sort of those lesser known, more individual level assets. So Ann, do you want to build on that? And maybe I'll just ask right away if you want to explain what we've got going for here in Charlottetown. I'll just open the floor up there. What we've got going for us in Charlottetown, or maybe some other projects from other jurisdictions that you're passionate and interested in.
Sure. Well, I mean, in Charlottetown, I think there are really good examples of things that are happening in the city that may be in specific neighborhoods, like the community garden, the Des Brisés community garden that's been going for many years now, like 25 at least, and is a really good example of people, it's very small scale, but gives a lot. There have been some really good projects that have come out of that gardens too, thanks to groups like the Food Exchange. And then there is the PEI Food Exchange, which isn't really a neighborhood project, but that and the Legacy Garden are situated in such ways that I think people can take advantage of them very well. I think, I do agree that that neighborhoods, as Lisa said, it's really important that people within the neighborhood are the drivers of their projects, and that is very important. But I think also, I wonder if some degree of coordination between projects is really useful too. So when you look at Charlottetown, for example, if there are specific neighborhoods may be looking for projects, but sometimes it's really valuable to have some overall coordinations. I've seen, and I haven't seen it, but I've read about the city of Vancouver has sort of a network of of local neighborhood food security groups. And those groups are the groups that are doing, workshops and doing sort of lunches and soup kitchens and developing skills together, sharing those skills. So, and I'm just back from Haida Gwaii, where it's the same. There's a wonderful local food to school project that's really expanded, and it covers the whole island, but it's a very small population, and it's really based in different communities or neighborhoods across the island. So the key there was that there was a sort of a central group doing the coordination, working with the sort of food champions and people in each specific community. So I think I do agree that we need people to be the drivers of their own projects, but I think that what really helps in many cases is to have some sort of facilitation or coordination on a sort of slightly bigger level.
That's great, and thanks so much. And Lisa just put in the comments too, thinking about the role of neighborhood associations in that way. And it's something that I think there is a lot of potential for here in PEI and in Charlottetown. And so if there's ways that sort of more governing bodies can coordinate that, and I do find that there tends to be some duplication. Here we're a small community, and sometimes it's the same people doing the same work at many different tables. And so I think that's a really great point for that reason. Just in the interest of time, I'm going to propel us along here. And what you just said, Ann, it's a good segue into this question. So sort of that accountability for someone, a group like the Charlottetown Food Council or other food related organizations. So these conversations are for sure important, but the action that actually comes after afterwards and the accountability for that is really what's critical. And how can we support citizens in engaging in that way, but also make sure that those in the decision making positions of power are supporting citizens in doing that. So I would ask you both, what can groups such as the Charlottetown Food Council and other food related groups do to facilitate neighborhood level food security? And whoever wants to answer that first can go ahead.
I'm going to let Ann start with that one.
Oh, sure. Okay. Yeah. Well, I mean, that is the challenge. I think that groups, again, sort of facilitating a process, providing people with opportunities to engage in the food system is really important. And it looks like the Food Council is an amazing, it's been 2 years. That's a really wonderful sort of commitment on the part of Charlottetown to make that happen. And I think that, I mean, that's, maybe that's where some of this coordination could come from. And, but first, you really need to go out to the people in the neighborhoods and, neighborhood associations, or even starting at the school level, I think could work. Maybe there's home and school organizations that would be interested. Because I know, we've had, there is the sort of experience of home and school really advocating for a school lunch program here. Food security has been on the agenda, and I think local schools, hopefully they are if we have proper zoning, they are neighborhood hubs for people. So I think, the first step, I suppose, is to find out what you've done sort of the food asset mapping to continue that, and also to sort of identify ways of reaching neighborhoods and food champions within those neighborhoods as well. So engaging them and determining what people want in their own communities is really important.
That's great. Thanks, Ann. What about you, Lisa?
Yeah, I would build on that, absolutely, to start in the neighborhoods. And I know that the council has done quite a bit of engagement already, and it sort of becomes just like the DNA of how you operate, not just a thing you do up front and then you're done. But I know a lot of you already know that. I also feel like we're grappling with something that's relative to this, which is, on the one hand, it's amazing to have so many talented and generous people give of their time as volunteers and in service to the community. And not everyone can do that. Like, it limits who can actually participate and maybe even share their gifts. And I know a lot of people here who want to be able to participate, would love to be able to volunteer. They literally do not have the time or can't take unpaid time to do that. So we're trying to really get more serious around our funding programs so that we can ensure that point people, anchor people in the communities, or whatever, are stipended at the very least. They receive some sort of bursary or some sort of financial cover to honor their time commitment. And that's particularly important for people of color and the Indigenous people in our community. We would love for them to be involved, but also for them to, for us to get out of the way and do power shifting. And we need to be really serious about listening to us and our new neighbors from other countries who are coming here. I think that's happening for you as well. Like, how do we create the conditions within which everyone can play more of a role in the civic life of our food system, and feel supported to do that, and not like we're just farming them for ideas, and they're creating more tension in their lives when they try to do that with us.
I'm so glad you brought that up, Lisa, and it really highlights well the last session that we had. For anyone on the call that was there, it was a really, really great conversation. And if you didn't get to the chance to sign in, then I would suggest you watch the recording later. But acknowledging me as a white person, I need to just move over and give the space for those that need to engage and have so many skills. And again, acknowledging every single person in our system has skills that they can contribute. It might be budgeting, it might be gardening, it might be they might be a chef. They may just have an extra freezer as for cold storage. So recognizing that everyone really has something to contribute. So I think we'll segue. We will try to wrap this portion up, but I'd open the floor up for, first of all, any final thoughts for this session. We will be coming back to you both. Any final thoughts for this session, and also if you could maybe rhyme off what the coolest neighborhood level project you've ever seen has been.
Oh gosh, I'm a little biased because as Pauline, I know Pauline's on the call, so she knows this, but we started doing these perma-blitz events where we would, literally in one day, it's like a food makeover for a property. And, from 9 in the morning till 5 in the evening, the place looked totally different. And all of a sudden there were gardens and fruit trees and just like that, none of it was there before. It was just a lawn. So that is like, it's social, it's tactical and strategic, it's practical, it's fun, people share food, like it brings all the things together. So I would lobby for things that, experiences are the best teachers would be my thing to leave on that note.
Couldn't agree more. Thanks. How about you, Anne? Any final thoughts? And if there's a cool neighborhood project that you
sure.
love.
First, I wanted to say, because I think maybe Pauline brought this up too in her chat, but just that I think one of the roles of a group like the Food Council would be to bring, to reach out to sort of groups that might not be the first ones that come to mind when you think of food security, but like a public transit group or a housing group, or that have an interest in, strong, healthy neighborhoods, and that together, I think that we need to address some of the policy issues and some of the bylaws and zoning issues and planning that is really, that can obstruct food security in cities. So, and so I think that's really important to note. I don't know about cool. I mean, again, Charlottetown, the Legacy Garden is amazing. That's being transformed. It's and I think Phil is on this call, so he had a lot to do with that. And the food exchange, just that giving people an opportunity to get involved in very practical ways, decreasing household food insecurity at the same time as engaging people in the food system and creating more of an awareness of that. And, and of course, Pauline's on this call, and that's been an amazing project. I think the project also that I was talking about in Haida Gwaii that's 10 years it's been going. And when I was there, I was looking at a webinar. There were a group of very young people talking about what they'd learned from their elders, how to fish, how to process fish, crabs, and other things. And right now, they're providing a lot of, there's a local food in the schools and in the healthcare institutions there. And, that's all supporting local economies in local communities. And so I think, so again, not necessarily a neighborhood level, but a small community level project. Yeah.
That's so great. Thank you both so much. This is just such a wonderful conversation. And perhaps we can maybe touch on the aspect a little bit more. It's not something I explicitly asked, but something that's really important in all of these themes is sort of how do we engage those non-traditional food sectors, because they do have a significant role to play in our system, whether they see that. Certainly, probably most people on the call see that. But so thank you both. This is a wonderful dialogue. And before moving on, I'm just like to point out the obvious that you, Anne, are of course a local food asset to us, and Lisa, you would be in your own community. And so thank you for all that you do. We will have more time in the question period to dive a little deeper and answer some of those questions. Keep writing in the chat box. But we are going to shift gears here and move into our breakout sessions. Okay, folks, welcome back to the main session. Thank you for contributing to those conversations. I hope there were some rich discussions in the rooms. It's just one other opportunity to have conversations and engage in that way. I am conscious of the time, and so we will go slightly over, not by much for folks, but if you do need to leave, thanks so much for joining, and just stay tuned for an email follow-up with information about the next session and ways you can provide feedback to the Food Council and all of that. So if you have not already, I'll remind you now to please go and complete the questions we have asked in Mentimeter. The information is posted in the chat box again for you. John's just done that. We will be using one of those questions as a closing activity. So please, over the course of the next few minutes, go ahead and do that. And we're now going to open up our question and answer period. So this is an opportunity to hear more from our panelists. If you have questions, please write them in the chat box. I know that you're already doing so. So I'll sort of try to monitor that. And perhaps we'll start. I think I'll go back here to one of the earlier questions.
Could I just interrupt you?
Unless David, do you want to pop on?
Could I just say, I
I
really appreciated getting the link tonight to be able to link to the Zoom. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Sorry, go ahead. I just, I couldn't hear there, but I think we're okay. Okay, so we'll move on to David's question. So how could the city facilitate neighborhood food hubs, which, for example, could facilitate buying groups to buy in bulk and store staple vegetables and meat? Ann or Lisa, if you want to take that question.
Yeah, I mean, maybe Ann, you might want to start since you are there and you know the lay of the land a little bit. And I can share what's happening, from my experience that may have some bearing on it.
Sure. I mean, I think it is kind of a chicken and egg question, because I think, as we've sort of talked about earlier, you want to be driven by an actual need and people who are in the neighborhood. So I think the first step for the city, and if there were resources behind it, because I understand the Food Council members are all volunteers, that it would be, determining whether or not a neighborhood wants that. Maybe it's sort of coming up with funds for a pilot project where you do that kind of outreach and community development work within one neighborhood. I think that could be a possibility.
That's great. Lisa, did you have anything you wanted to add there?
Yeah, I would just add, I don't know if there are existing neighborhood associations in the different neighborhoods of Charlottetown, or
some kind of self-organized through Facebook groups. North of Euston would be a really awesome example of that, but we don't really have formal neighborhood associations at sort of the local organic level, which is obviously more impactful, but something that why I'm excited we're talking about this theme is because we don't have that in that same way that other jurisdictions do here.
Yeah. I know that on the West Coast, that's much more developed in a lot of West Coast cities. And so I do think that there's a little bit of fact finding or reading the landscape or going into the existing, whether it be church groups or, like Ann mentioned earlier, there's many existing sort of aligned but non-food initiatives that already exist, and, getting on their agendas to just share an invitation that this is something that might want to be developed over the coming year to 5, whatever your time frame is, and just start to get the conversation going and get some support from the top down, but also just going to where the neighbors are already congregating and inviting some conversations and brainstorming about what they'd like to see happen to support neighborhood level food security like this and food hubs.
Yeah. And when I was talking earlier, I had meant to mention I live out of town, but my local grocery store, the country store, is Gallant's Clover Farm, and during the pandemic they were amazing. They were delivering food to people. They were, they've been making prepared meals that people can get at a very affordable rate. And they always have stocked locally produced food and locally gathered food. So I think that is actually, one of those places that Lisa mentioned where people actually gather around food is local, your local corner store.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. People come together over food. And I think we need to always remember that too, whether it's your neighbor to neighbor or the whole block or the community. It's a really great way to build that social connection. I do see some awesome chat box happening to talk about the food asset map, and that's really great. I think it's important to talk about some of the gaps that might be there. Pauline referenced cold storage, and that's something we've talked about as the council being really important. That's a really important asset. And so what does that look like in Charlottetown, but something that we just are not as aware of. And I see Katrina's puppy there, not to put her on the spot, but that is adorable. I do have I saw some great comments too about what bylaws Food Council could look at. And I think for all the participants, making sure that you're holding groups like the Charlottetown Food Council and other related organizations accountable. This is a conversation, this is the start, but where do we go from here? One other question that David had was related to having more markets. So when he lived in Germany in a small city, there were farmers markets in each neighborhood. And I myself have lived in Europe and noticed the same thing. They're sort of in each neighborhood on different days of the week. Is this something that we could do in more parts of our own city here?
Yeah, I mean, that's hard to say. Many of us have maybe had the chance to travel to some of those places, which almost have like an intact historical lineage of doing this for like hundreds of years and sometimes longer. And so we're in an interesting case, I think, here in Turtle Island of like figuring out what are those kind of legacy systems that we did not inherit or maybe lost somewhere along the way and want to reimagine. So I think it's absolutely worth considering if we're expecting farmers to show up every day of the week, but in a different neighborhood, that conversation has to happen with them because that's not always the best use of their time. But maybe there's a creative way that hubs and other aggregated systems could still make something like this happen in a unique Charlottetown kind of flavor. I do want to say about the ordinance thing real quick that for my town, I'm just outside of Portland in Cape Elizabeth. And when we started our local town's food organization in 2007, one of the very first tasks we took on was to go through the town's local zoning and ordinances line by line to make sure that we could be as farm and food and fishing friendly as possible, and to remove inconsistencies which just build up in ordinances over time, just accidentally, because it's an accretion of like sludge over time with ordinances sometimes. So there's a process of like, what in our ordinances prevent local neighborhood food security and what could we do to enhance them and build community support for those changes so that by the time they go to get approved at city council, it's already like unanimously approved by the community, and then the council's like there with you.
That's such a good point, and everything you've just raised is really essential to all of this going forward in sort of an inclusive and sustainable way. I do see there's still some great chat going on related to the food asset map. And just a reminder that any questions that you do have, you can reach out to the Food Council members. And this is why we're having the conversation to really see what at the foundation, what is it that we have? Where are the gaps that we could potentially improve? And what are the strengths that we can actually build on? We're so fortunate here in PEI and in Charlottetown. We've got such an awesome community. So how can we build on that? I might just ask, I know we're a little bit over, but I'm hoping to wrap up here shortly, but I do want to get as much as we can out of having Lisa and Ann here. So I will maybe ask you one more question, and it was sort of touched on towards the end there of the interview that we did. And so what are ways that we can engage the non-traditional food sectors in these conversations and in action. If you've got tangible ways of doing that, and it might be at the neighborhood level, it might be at the policy level, but what are some tangible ways that organizations, folks on the call, citizens can start engaging those maybe non-traditional food sectors in contributing to neighborhood connectivity and neighborhood local food sovereignty, all of that.
Can you just say what you mean by non-traditional food sector?
So we touched on earlier a group like department like transportation,
I see.
or
Yep.
you know, healthcare is more closely
Yeah.
tied, but as an institution, or in the rooms that I was in a room and we talked about displacement of imports and what's the responsibility of institutions as an example. What's their definition of local procurement, and are they meeting that? And so what would some of those other sectors, transportation is one example, but social development and housing would be another, things like that.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Ann, is Ann still there? Might she want to jump in on that, or?
It's okay if not. It's
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I feel like a lot of this has to do with getting really clear about framing on shared values. Like, what are the shared values that we aspire to across those seemingly disparate sectors? Like, what do we actually have in common as goals and aspirations for our community? And then I would focus on like describing the work of the council, you know, in those terms. Like, we're stronger together, and 2 + 2 = more than 4 if we become allies and mutual aid of in mutual aid of each other's efforts. And chances are there's something in common in terms of the values that you hold for the community. That's the first place to start.
Mm-hmm. And there's always economic value. You can frame it, sort of framing it in the way that maybe the audience or the person you're trying to buy into a concept is engaged in that way, that speaking their language and meeting them where they are too, is something really important. I think we've lost Ann, actually. So thank you for all her contributions. And I'm just keeping an eye on the chat box here too. Pauline just made a really good point that how libraries are starting to become sort of that space for community hubs and where people go to access things, everything from snowshoes to learning opportunities to maybe food literacy assets. So I think that's a really good point, Pauline. And we are in the process of building a new library here in Charlottetown. So I'm really keen to see what that looks like and how it is inclusive to our food system. It's inclusive to all our citizens and community as a whole, to bring people together in that way. So maybe I'll leave the floor to you, Lisa, for any final thoughts. I don't see any other questions that are not related to the food asset in my chat box. Sorry if I did miss you, but I'll give you the floor for some final thoughts, Lisa, before I close out for tonight.
Yeah, just huge appreciation for inviting me. Chunk of my heart is up there with you, even though I'm not there physically, and hope to get back later in, maybe later in 2021. But I do feel like I want to honor the fact that we are in some really challenging times for a lot of people, and just to hold all of that with a lot of compassion. And it's okay, in my mind, that our food system efforts do both harm reduction in the moment, like we need to make sure we take care of people and feed them healthy food in the now, even though we also need to be getting at root cause system change. So we have to do like both of those things simultaneously, and just honor that different people will plug into that work in different ways, and that everyone's contribution just feels really valued in that. So I know that that's already in the spirit of the people of Charlottetown and PEI to work that way. So just really appreciating being able to be part of the conversation.
Thanks so much for joining us, Lisa. That's a wonderful way to close out. I think it really captures why we're here talking about food assets at the local level. Everyone who eats food in Charlottetown is part of our system, and they have skills that they can contribute in that way. So that's a really, really good way to close out and reminding how we can support our neighbors in such trying times. So thanks for all your wisdom and wealth of knowledge here tonight, Lisa. We're so lucky that you were here with us. Now I know this hour has flown by and we've really barely scratched the surface, and I'm sorry to keep you a few minutes over, but we will be closing up here now. But before you go, we are going to pull up the responses to the Mentimeter questions, but specifically the last one. And I would just like to focus on that one. It was, what is the most important food asset to you in your neighborhood or community? And we asked this is important information for not only the validation process that we're trying to do with our food asset map, but it's also important to the conversation we're having. And we really should all be thinking about why that is the most important resource to you and why that might be. Is this something that everyone has access to, or only some groups or neighborhoods? And so these are the kinds of conversations we're wanting to have. Can my neighbor access that? Is that something that they have a skill in, or is that something I have a skill in? And where can I access that? Does it require me to drive in my own car to get there? All of those things I think are really important considerations. And that's where all of these themes tie together, is really with the local assets that we have. We're tying all those topics together in that way. So with that, I'm going to pull up a reminder slide here for you. And I just want to remind you of some upcoming, the upcoming session that we do have. And that will be on Thursday at 2 p.m. and we hope you can join us. I'm going to pull this here. So obviously, thanks for joining us this evening. We do have an evaluation survey that will be sent out. So we'll be sending out an email that will include an evaluation survey, and that will just help us as a food council to know how the event itself went and ways that we can improve if we're to do more of these in the future. And there will also be a link to the snapshot of the food asset map that you saw. And please provide us with any feedback if you have it. There is a form on the Food Council webpage as well for that. The food questionnaire, the community food questionnaire, is also open until December 18th. And there are physical copies around Charlottetown for those who do not have internet access. So please make sure if you haven't filled that out to do so, and share with your networks. I know I see a lot of names on the calls that have really great networks that we could get more people to answer that questionnaire. So that would be wonderful. And please sign up for the next session. The next one will be our last one for the series. And that's on Thursday at 2. And we will have a wonderful panel there talking about how we can support local every day. So we've got some great one-off events, annual sort of events that we have in our community, but what are ways that we can turn that into 365 days a year? How can we make it tangible and support each other in that way every day? So just to close out, I just again want to make sure that you all know that this is not a solution, and instead we hope a first step. We hope that you enjoyed engaging in this conversation and that you'll all continue to engage in conversations like these with us. Yes, this is Charlottetown, but we are a unique island and really one food system. So whether it's neighborhood, community, municipality, provincial levels, all of these are really integral to our local food system here. And again, I just want to acknowledge that there are limitations to some people participating. So we hope to provide future opportunities that are more accessible. And I know that there was some great chat in the box related to the food asset map. So keep engaging with us on that, and we hope to continue to improve it and make sure it's reflective of our community and our local food system. I've put the contact information for us up on there. You can find us on the City of Charlottetown website, charlottetown.ca/food council, or you've got our names and contact probably now. So with that, I will close us out. Sorry for keeping you a little longer this evening. Thank you all so much for participating. Merci. Valalan, gracias. Thank you. See you all on December 3rd.